Welcome to the Traveling Flaneur podcast, where I'll talk about the economy, politics, history, and culture of the places I've visited. I'll also give you travel tips, recommend places to visit, things to do, and the best food. The life of a flaneur is that of an observer, a person who wanders aimlessly with eyes always open to any opportunity. It is a person who is in no hurry and prefers the journey over the destination. I believe that in this hurried world we live in, we need more flaneurs, and I hope you enjoy the perspective from a traveling flaneur and maybe become one in your next trip. Welcome to Canada. Canada is often known as the Great White North, and this is a country located in the top of North America, and it will be our destination for the upcoming episodes. This country is well known for its beautiful landscapes and its important cities, and it's one of my favorite destinations. It's a place where you can go hiking, skiing, swimming, kayaking, or simply just exploring some of the most amazing cities in North America, like Vancouver, Montreal, or Toronto. Another awesome thing about Canada is its multiculturalism, because in Canada you can find people from everywhere, and as a matter of fact, it is one of the most diverse countries in the entire world, with cities like Toronto where almost 50% of its population is foreign-born. As I usually do in my introductory episodes, I'm going to give you a context that summarizes everything you need to know before you visit Canada, regarding its economics, politics, and history, and even culture. But I'll kick off this episode with some quick fun facts about this country. First, Canada is famous for its maple syrup, which you probably already knew, but the fun part is that they actually produce about 80% of the world's maple syrup, which is a very big number. Second fun fact is that Canada has a vast land area of approximately 9.98 million square kilometers, which makes it the second largest country in the entire world, just behind Russia. Third fact, the word Canada is actually derived from the Huron-Iroquois Kanata, which means village or settlement. And then my last fact is that Canada has the largest moose population on the entire planet. So, now that you know some of the things that make Canada unique, let's go to a macroeconomic view of Canada. This country has a population of around 39 million people, which is the same as the population of California. But I was just telling you this is the second largest country on Earth for landmass. So the key here would be that most of the land is very up north, and that makes it extremely cold, and so most of the big cities are actually near the US frontier, having most of this population living in the cities. Regarding the GDP, Canada is around $2.1 trillion, which translates to a GDP per capita of approximately $53,000 US. All of this means that, on average, a Canadian earns around $53,000 US per year. This number is going to place Canada among the wealthiest nations globally, with a high standard of living and a well-developed infrastructure. Canada's economy is one of the most stable and prosperous in the world. It is rich in natural resources, particularly in energy, forestry, and mining, and all of this play a crucial role in the economy. The country has also low unemployment levels, standing at approximately 6%, and it uses the Canadian dollar as a currency. $1 US equals around 1.35 Canadian dollars. Historically, Canada's economic development has evolved from a reliance on all of its natural resources to a focus on manufacturing and services. Initially, Canada's economy was driven by exploiting and exporting its natural resources like oil, because Canada is the third country with the biggest oil reserves in the world, standing just behind Saudi Arabia and Venezuela. However, by the end of the 20th century, the manufacturing and service sectors became dominant, employing nearly 3/4 of the workforce. Canada supported its manufacturing through protective tariffs, which encouraged U.S. firms to establish branch plants and government grants to stimulate regional economic development. In the 1980s, Canada began to reduce these protective measures and subsidies, and all of this led to a decline in manufacturing protection and regional economic support. And this shift, coupled with the establishment of free trade agreements like the NAFTA, led to some multinational companies to relocate the factories to lower-cost countries like Mexico, which caused big job losses in Canada. The economy then became heavily privatized, and it created a significant role for the service sector. When we look at international trade, United States is Canada's chief trading partner, constituting more than two-thirds of all of the Canadian trade. And the dependence on the U.S. economy is in exports and in imports. Because exports to the U.S. are so important, any business trend in the United States tends to feed back directly and quickly into the Canadian business sectors, and so changes in consumer tastes may have a disproportionate effect on the Canadian producer. The second largest commercial partner is China, but they only receive around 4% of the Canadian exports compared to the 77% that goes to the US. So China technically is not very important. Another thing that distinguishes the Canadian economy from the rest of the world is their tax rate, because Canadian individual income tax rates are higher than in the US, and all of this makes many Canadians seek employment south of the border. Tax revenues make up about 1/5 of Canadians' GDP, with personal income taxes being the largest source. And the last important aspect in this economy is regarding their protected industries, because there are 3 industries that have government protection: airlines, banks, and telco. All of this has historically led to a lack of competition and therefore innovation in these industries. But then, that also makes them stronger than the rest of the world, which has been good for Canadians in financial crises, for example, as the financial industry in Canada is very strong and resilient to damage. But it has also been bad in the other industries because Canadians, for example, pay a lot for their internet or phone services just because this is a very protected industry and there are not many players around. In terms of politics, Canada is a parliamentary democracy within a constitutional monarchy. So, what does this mean? Basically, that the country has a prime minister who is the head of the government, while the head of the state is the British monarch, which is represented in Canada by the Governor-General. This Governor-General that represents the monarchy is the one that will choose the Prime Minister, typically selecting the individual that's most likely to maintain the support of the House of Commons. In practice, the Prime Minister wields significant power, especially over executive decisions and leading the legislative process. But one weird thing is that the Prime Minister is going to serve on, quote, His Majesty's pleasure. So, meaning that there is not a fixed term and that he can be there for an undefined amount of time. But elections are typically held every 4 years. Justin Trudeau has been Canada's Prime Minister for almost 9 years already, and he's famous for many measures, such as implementing a federal carbon tax to address climate change, or implementing programs that may promote high levels of immigration, and also the emphasis on reconciliation with Indigenous communities. Now I'm going to pass on to talking about the Canadian culture, because it is very diverse and extremely interesting, as it blends British, French, and American influences, and all of this enriched by the global population that they have and their Indigenous heritage. So everywhere you'll go, you'll find this mixture, but there are 2 places that do have a more dominant culture. The first one is going to be Quebec region, where the French culture remains very dominant and it influences the cuisine, the architecture, the music, and, well, obviously the language. Because as you might know, Canada has 2 languages, English and then French, which is mostly spoken in Quebec. The second place that has a predominant culture would be around the northern regions, where the Indigenous cultures are still predominant and they are increasingly getting recognized with all of their arts, such as carving and sculpture. But the Canadian culture is amazing, and living here, I've gotten to experience all of this mix that makes it a very welcoming country. If I had to choose some of my favorite elements of this culture, I'd pick 5: the food, the sports, the artists, the outdoors, and the politeness. So let's look at each one of those. First, the food, because the food that I've tried in Canada, and specifically in Toronto, is one of the best I've ever tried in the entire world because it has food from absolutely every country in the world, and it keeps its authenticity. So I have some Indian friends, for example, that have said that Indian food in the US is not very similar to the one they actually cook at home because it's way less spicy and way less flavorful. And this makes it a little bit more Americanized, as they say. And I think the good thing in Canada is that foreigners are encouraged to keep their culture of origin first and bring it to others. And for example, in supermarkets, most immigrants will be able to get some of their ingredients, if not the majority, that they would get from back home. So food here, even in my friends' words, tastes a little bit more like home. And all of this opens up the possibility of trying out most of the world's cuisines in just one city. And I'm talking beyond Italian, Thai, or Indian. In Toronto, I've tried Georgian food, Ethiopian, Nigerian, Tibetan, Afghan, Pakistani, everything. And for all great foodies, I believe Toronto is heaven. Now, with sports, Canadians also have some very particular sports, like lacrosse, hockey, or Canadian football. And this one is actually different from American football, but personally, I don't know the difference, so I won't go into that. I had never watched hockey games before, and although hockey is also very popular in the US as well, it is one of the top Canadian sports, and surprisingly, I found it to be very cool. And well, Toronto is also the home to Major League Baseball's Blue Jays and the NBA's Raptors. So if you also want to enjoy good US sports, you can find incredible teams that are playing in Canada. Now, the third thing that I'd like to highlight are the artists, because Canada is home to many worldwide artists that you might know and that you might not even know that they were Canadian. So Justin Bieber, Drake, Avril Lavigne, Michael Bublé, The Weeknd, Celine Dion, all of them are Canadian. And there are also a lot of actors and actresses that are Canadian, like Jim Carrey, Ryan Reynolds, Rachel McAdams, Ryan Gosling, and Keanu Reeves. They are all Canadian as well. So this is very cool, and I think it's because the arts have a very important aspect in the Canadian culture, and in Toronto is also where you have some important film festivals such as the TIFF. So now I'll pass on to my fourth element, and it's Canadians' connection with nature, because this country is home to some of the most beautiful natural parks in the world, and the outdoors play a very big role in the Canadian life. So skiing, hiking, camping, kayaking, canoeing, and even portaging are activities that are very popular among most of the Canadians that I've met. And yes, for all of those who don't know what is portaging, this means that you go hiking with a canoe. And so apart from carrying all your bags with the tent, with everything, with the food, you're going to put a canoe in your head and like with another person on the back that will help you carry that canoe. And you're going to be walking to different places, kind of like mixing canoeing with camping. And this is very Canadian. The last thing that I'm going to highlight from this culture is the politeness of its people. And probably you already know this, but Canadians are very known for being nice. They always say thank you, they always say sorry, they will hold the door for you, and this is kind of a stereotype that people have made from Canadians, especially Americans, but I believe it's a very nice stereotype to have. And the majority of the people that I've met are very nice and very polite, and so I would dare to say that most of the Canadians are going to be always welcoming and nice. So I hope that after listening to all of this, you're eager to visit this beautiful country. But I'm going to now wrap up my episode giving you all the travel tips that you need for visiting Canada. So first, how long should you visit? Canada is vast, and the length of your stay will of course depend on what you want to see. If you're only focusing on one region, like Quebec, I think a week could be enough, but if you want to explore multiple provinces, you may need several weeks. I would say that it takes you 10 days to explore Quebec City, Montreal, and Ottawa. Then, if you want to add Toronto to that list, you should then make it a 15-day trip total. And if you want to add Vancouver, then it should probably turn into a 20-day trip. But then if you also want to add the natural parks and Calgary, I would say it needs to be around 30 days total. So you can stay as little as 4 days or up to a month depending on what you want to visit. But I'll explain the timings better in all of my future episodes so you can know what to do in each one of these days and in each one of these regions. Now, the second advice, when is the best time to visit? Well, if you want to escape the cold, then the perfect months are going to be June to September. October is going to have some beautiful fall colors and will still be a little bit warm, so I would say that's one of my favorite months to visit, with September, especially if you also want to go to the natural parks and see all of the lakes with their blue turquoise color. But if you visit during the other months, you'll still survive, because even though people think that Canada is very, very cold, I think all of the snowy landscapes and visiting the mountains while they're covered in snow, or cities when they're also covered in snow, is going to be beautiful. And so that leads me to my third advice, and this is a question I receive often: how cold is Canada? And well, let's admit it, it is cold, very cold, but also not as cold as you would expect, probably, because this country is used to the coldness. So it's designed in ways that still, with lots of snow and lots of cold weather, it's going to work perfectly. And here, you're going to find very, very good coats that are going to be designed specially for this weather. And local brands like Canada Goose, Aritzia, or Mountain Warehouse are going to have very good clothes that are going to be specifically designed for this weather. So my only advice to you would be that you shouldn't bring your own coats or jackets, because it will be better buying some here, as they are designed for the Canadian weather. And also, on the bright side, since Canada is cold, that makes it a paradise in the summer, because it's never extremely hot, and the hottest you might get will be probably around 30 degrees Celsius. So now, fourth question, how expensive is it to visit Canada? It might be a little bit cheaper than the US, but I would say it is very similar, so I would categorize it as expensive, especially for lodging. So in Toronto, if you want to stay downtown, probably the cheapest you can get is a studio that will cost you 250 Canadian dollars per night. And prices are going to be similar in Banff or in other national parks, where you can get a room in a cheap hotel and it might cost you around $250 per night. For food, you might get good food for two persons for around $50 or $60, and great restaurants might probably be $80 or higher for two persons. And all of these numbers that I'm giving you are in Canadian dollars, so it's going to be a little bit less if you're thinking your standards in US dollars. But overall, I would still say it's expensive to visit. And the last advice, do you need a visa for visiting Canada? Yes, probably, because many countries need a tourist visa to enter. I'll leave the official government website when you can check if you would need a visa. But if you do need one, you should plan ahead, because visas usually take a very long time, so I would say try to get it at least 5 months before your trip, because it might take this amount or even longer to get it. So if you start doing all of the requirements and procedure for the visa, it might be 5 months or 6 months approximately. In this same link, you're going to find the requirements that you need for applying. So that's it. In my next episodes, I'm going to take you on a journey through this country, showing you all of its cities and its natural landscapes. I hope that after listening to this episode, now you know more about Canada's economics, politics, and culture. If you enjoyed this episode, please share it with a friend who loves to travel, and give me a review, as this helps me tremendously and it encourages me to give you more travel tips. Tell me in the comments if there's something that surprised you about this episode, and I hope to see you next week to start exploring Canada's natural beauty. Safe travels!